I'm Rebecca Martinez, 38, a successful child psychologist who's spent my career helping families heal. But there's one wound I never thought I'd confront until last month, when my mother called asking for help. You see, when I was 4 years old, she left me at daycare for 3 entire days, claiming she'd be right back. I waited by that window, watching every car, believing she'd return. The abandonment shaped everything about who I became, now 34 years later. As she faces her own moment of need, she's about to discover that some lessons about abandonment cut deeper than she ever imagined. If you've ever wondered whether forgiveness has limits, stay with me because this story will change how you think about family, loyalty, and the price of neglect. The voicemail had been waiting on my phone for 3 days before I finally listened to it. I recognized the number Sunset Manor nursing home, but I'd been avoiding it like I avoided everything connected to her. Dr. Martinez, this is Linda Chen from Sunset Manor. Your mother, Patricia Martinez, has been asking for you. She's had some health complications, and we really need to discuss her care plan with family. Could you please call us back as soon as possible, family? The words sat bitter in my mouth as I stared at my phone screen. Linda Chen had no idea she was asking the woman who'd spent 34 years rebuilding herself from the wreckage of maternal abandonment to suddenly play the role of devoted daughter. I was in my office when I finally returned the call, surrounded by the awards and certificates that proved I'd made something of myself despite her. The irony wasn't lost on me here. I was Dr. Rebecca Martinez, specialist in childhood trauma and family dysfunction, about to navigate the minefield of my own broken family dynamics. Ms. Chen, this is Dr. Martinez, returning your call about Patricia. Oh, Dr. Martinez, thank you so much for calling back. Your mother has been quite anxious about reaching you. She's been experiencing some confusion and memory issues, and her diabetes management has become challenging. We need someone to help make decisions about her treatment plan. Someone. As if I owed her that? As if the woman who taught me what abandonment felt like at 4 years old had earned the right to my presence in her moment of need. What exactly are you asking of me? I kept my voice clinical, professional, the same tone I used when helping other people navigate their family crises. Well, she's listed you as her emergency contact, and frankly, you're the only family member we've been able to locate. She needs someone to help coordinate her care, possibly consider assisted living options, and make medical decisions if her condition worsens. Emergency contact. I almost laughed. The woman who disappeared for 3 days when I was 4, leaving me to wonder if I'd been permanently forgotten, had somehow decided I was the person to call in her emergency. I see. I looked out my office window at the parking lot where successful adults came and went, living their normal lives with their normal families. Has she had any other visitors recently? A pause. No, Dr. Martinez, you would be her first visitor in several months. Of course I would be. Just like I'd been the only one waiting for her at that daycare window all those years ago. The parallel wasn't lost on me. Was waiting again, and once again I held all the power over whether anyone would come. I'll need to think about this, Ms. Chen. Can I call you back tomorrow? Of course. But Dr. Martinez, she really is quite frail. I think seeing you would mean a great deal to her. I hung up without promising anything. After all, I'd learned from the best that promises could be broken. That night, I found myself in my home office, staring at a faded photograph I kept buried in my desk drawer, picture from Little Angel's Daycare, taken the day before everything changed. 4-year-old me grinned at the camera, gap-toothed and trusting, surrounded by other children who still believed their parents would always come back. I was wearing my favorite purple dress with the butterfly pattern. It's the one Mom had bought me for my first day at the new daycare. You look like a little princess, she'd said that morning, braiding my hair with the care she reserved for special occasions. I believed her completely. Believed in her completely. It was a Tuesday in September, unseasonably warm for the time of year. Mom had seemed different that morning, distracted, checking her phone more than usual, but she'd still made me breakfast and packed my favorite peanut butter and jelly sandwich. When we pulled up to Little Angel's, the yellow building with its cheerful painted flowers seemed like the most wonderful place in the world. All right, baby girl, she'd said, kneeling down to my eye level in the parking lot. Mommy has some important things to take care of today, but I'll be back right after snack time, okay? Promise? I'd asked, because even at 4, I'd started. Noticing that Mom's promises sometimes shifted like sand. Cross my heart, she'd said, making the gesture over her chest that I thought was the most sacred vow in the universe. Be good for Mrs. Patterson, and I'll see you so soon. Mrs. Patterson was everything a daycare teacher should be: soft and warm. With graying hair she wore in a neat bun and cardigan pockets full of tissues and Band-Aids. She'd welcomed me with genuine kindness, helping me hang my tiny backpack. On the hook labeled with my name in cheerful block letters. The morning had been magical. We'd sung songs about the days of the week, played with building blocks, and during story time, I'd sat cross-legged on the carpet, completely absorbed in tales of brave little mice and friendly dragons. During snack time, maple slices and goldfish. Crackers. I'd kept glancing at the clock, even though I couldn't really read it yet. Mrs. Patterson had noticed. Your mommy will be here soon, sweetheart, she'd said gently, refilling my cup with apple juice. But snack time came and went. We moved on to arts and crafts, where I made a picture of a house with stick figures, me and Mom holding hands under a smiling sun. I'd been so proud of it, so eager to show her when she arrived. Lunchtime, I ate my peanut butter and jelly sandwich slowly, making it last, watching the door for her familiar silhouette. Other children chatted about their morning adventures, but I stayed quiet, focused on listening for the sound of her car in the parking lot. Then came afternoon playtime, and I stationed myself by the big window that overlooked the pickup area. This became my post, my sacred duty. Every car that pulled up sent my heart racing. Maybe this time, maybe now. But it was always someone else's parent, someone else's reunion. Rebecca, honey, would you like to come play with the dollhouse? Mrs. Patterson had asked around 2 o'clock, her voice carrying a note I couldn't identify then but recognize now as concern. I need to watch for my mommy, I'd explained matter-of-factly, she said after snack time. By 3:30, when the first wave of pickups began, I was pressed against that window like a small sentry. One by one, my classmates gathered there. Artwork and backpacks ran into waiting arms and disappeared into their regular lives. The classroom grew quieter. The parking lot emptied. Mrs. Patterson kept checking her watch and the phone at the front desk. I heard her making calls, soft, concerned conversations I wasn't supposed to understand. As the sun began to set, the last child was collected by a harried parent apologizing for being late. I remained at my window post, certain that any moment would bring the sight of Mom's car pulling into the lot any moment now. By 6 o'clock, Little Angels was supposed to be closed. The parking lot stood empty except for Mrs. Patterson's old Honda and one other car belonging to Miss Sarah, the afternoon teacher who'd stayed behind. I was still at my window, though. My breath had fogged the glass from pressing my face against it for so long. Rebecca, sweetie, Mrs. Patterson said gently, kneeling beside me. Would you like to help me with something special? I didn't move from the window. I'm waiting for my mommy. I know you are, honey. But while we wait, maybe we could make her a special picture. Something beautiful to show her when she gets here. Crayon drawing I made that evening, a stick figure of me and Mom, holding hands under a rainbow, would eventually end up in my daycare file. Discovered years later when I was old enough to request my records. At 4, I drew it with absolute faith that she would see it, that she would hang it on our refrigerator and tell me how talented I was. Mrs. Patterson had ordered pizza for dinner. Something that should have felt like an adventure. Instead, I picked at the cheese, my stomach too twisted with worry to eat. Every car that passed outside sent me scrambling back to the window. But the streets stayed stubbornly empty of familiar vehicles. Rebecca, Miss Sarah said around 7:30, would you like to call your mommy? Maybe remind her it's pickup time. Mrs. Patterson's face tightened almost imperceptibly. I didn't understand then that they'd already tried calling multiple ball times. The phone had rung and rung before going to voicemail, my mother's cheerful voice promising to call back soon. When 8 o'clock came and went, Mrs. Patterson made a decision that probably saved my sanity that first night. She pulled out a small cot from the supply closet, the kind used for nap time, and set it up in the reading corner. You know what, Rebecca? I think we're going to have a special sleepover tonight, just you and me. Won't that be fun? I didn't want a sleepover. I wanted my mother. But something in Mrs. Patterson's voice, gentle but firm, told me that arguing wouldn't bring Mom back any faster. She helped me brush my teeth with a spare toothbrush she kept for emergencies, gave me one of the extra t-shirts from the Lost and Found box to sleep in, and tucked me into the little cot with a blanket that smelled like industrial detergent and other children's dreams. "Will my mommy know where to find me?" I whispered into the darkness. "She knows, sweetheart. The first place any mommy would look for her little girl is right here." Mrs. Patterson slept on the other cot, positioned so she could see both me and the front door. I learned later that she'd called her own family, canceling dinner plans and disappointing her teenage daughter, just to make sure I wouldn't wake up alone. But I barely slept that first night. Every sound, the building settling, a car passing on the street, the hum of the heating system, made me hold my breath and listen for the sound of Mom's key in the door, her voice calling my name, her footsteps hurrying to scoop me up and apologize for being so late in the dark. I whispered the things I would say to her when she came: how I'd been brave and good, how I'd helped Mrs. Patterson clean up the toys, how I'd made her a beautiful picture. I practiced the hug I would give her, rehearsed the forgiveness that felt so natural then. Dawn came gray and cloudy through the daycare windows. Mrs. Patterson stirred first, checking her watch and then looking at me with an expression I now recognize as heartbreak, carefully masked as hope. "Good morning, sunshine," she said softly. "Ready for another day?" I nodded, though I wasn't ready for anything except the moment my mother would finally walk through that door. Day 2 arrived with the sound of other children's voices in the hallway. Normal children whose parents had remembered to collect them, who'd slept in their own beds and eaten breakfast at their own kitchen tables. I watched from my cot as Mrs. Patterson unlocked the front door, her movements careful and deliberate, as if she were trying not to wake something fragile. "Good morning, Rebecca," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "'D you like some?" "Cereal? I brought some from home." The cereal was Lucky Charms, my favorite, though. I wouldn't learn until years later that Mrs. Patterson had driven to the grocery store at 6 in the morning, specifically to buy it for me. At 4, I simply accepted this kindness as evidence that adults would take care of me, even when the most important adult had forgotten to. But as the morning progressed and other children, arrived with their lunchboxes and artwork from home, I began to understand that my situation was different. Tommy Chen asked why I was wearing yesterday's clothes. Lily Morrison wanted to know if I was moving into the daycare forever. Their innocent questions carved small wounds in my confidence. "Mommy is coming," I told them with decreasing certainty. She just had really important things to do. Mrs. Patterson fielded phone calls throughout the morning, conversations conducted in hushed tones that I strained to hear. I caught fragments. "Still no response. Tried the emergency contact. Not sure what our options are." The words meant nothing to me then, but the worry in her voice was unmistakable. By lunchtime on the second day, I'd stopped eating entirely. The peanut butter sandwich Mrs. Patterson offered sat untouched on my plate while I maintained my vigil at the window. Every fiber of my being was focused on the parking lot, on the miracle of recognition that would make everything normal again. Miss Sarah brought a doctor kit from the dramatic play area and pretended to examine my dolls, trying to coax me away from the window. "Rebecca, Dr. Bear needs your help. He's very sick, and only you can make him better." I shook my head without looking away from the glass. "I have to watch for my mommy, so I'll be able to find you if you play for just a few minutes." "No." My voice was smaller now, less certain. "What if she comes and thinks I don't want to see her?" The look that passed between Mrs. Patterson and Miss Sarah was loaded with adult understanding I couldn't access. Now I know they were watching a child's psyche fracture in real time, documenting the moment when trust began its long death. The incident report Mrs. Patterson filed that afternoon was clinical in its language. Child exhibits signs of severe separation anxiety, refuses food, sleep disrupted, regression in toileting habits observed, multiple attempts to contact parent unsuccessful, social services notified per protocol. What the report couldn't capture was the way I'd started talking to myself by the window, having both sides of conversations with an imaginary mother. "I'm sorry I was bad, Mommy. I'll be better now. Please come get me." These whispered negotiations with the empty parking lot were my 4-year-old attempts to bargain with abandonment itself. The third day was when I stopped speaking altogether. Mrs. Patterson tried everything: my favorite songs, special snacks, stories about brave little girls. Nothing penetrated the shell of silence I'd built around myself. I sat at that window like a small statue, watching and waiting with the intensity of someone whose entire world depended on a single car pulling into a single parking space. Other parents began to notice. I overheard fragments of their conversations. During pickup time, "Where's that little girl's mother? 3 days? That's not right. Someone should call the police." Their voices carried the outrage I was too young to feel for myself. Miss Sarah brought coloring books and tried to sit beside me. "Rebecca, would you like to color a picture for when your mommy comes?" I didn't respond. I learned that hoping out loud made the disappointment sharper. By evening of the third day, when the social worker finally arrived, a kind woman named Ms. Rodriguez, with gentle eyes and official paperwork, I barely registered her presence. I was beyond words, beyond tears, existing in a gray space where mothers disappeared and promises meant nothing. Mrs. Patterson was crying when she handed over my file, though she tried to hide it from me. "She's such a good little girl," she told Ms. Rodriguez. "She doesn't deserve this." I pressed my small hand against the window one more time, leaving a print that would fade by morning. She walked in like nothing had happened. Friday afternoon, just as Ms. Rodriguez was explaining temporary foster care procedures to Mrs. Patterson, the front door chimed its cheerful welcome. Mom breezed through like she was picking me up from a normal day, her hair freshly styled, wearing a dress I'd never seen before. "Sorry I'm a little late," she said brightly, as if 3 days qualified as a little late. Traffic was just awful. The adults in the room froze. Mrs. Patterson's mouth opened and closed without sound. Ms. Rodriguez's pen stopped mid-sentence on her paperwork. I turned from my window post for the first time in hours, and the world tilted sideways. She was there. Really there? My 4-year-old brain couldn't process the relief and rage and confusion all tangled together. I wanted to run to her and hit her and disappear all at once. "Mommy?" My voice came out as a whisper, the first word I'd spoken in 18 hours. "There's my baby girl." She moved toward me with arms outstretched, and every instinct I had screamed at me to run into them, but my legs wouldn't work. Something was wrong with her. Smelt too much perfume, trying to cover something else. Something sharp and bitter that made my nose wrinkle. "Ma'am," Ms. Rodriguez said, her voice carrying authority I'd never heard directed at my mother before. "We need to discuss your daughter's welfare. She's been here for 3 days without contact from you." Mom's smile flickered but didn't fade. "Oh, that's so dramatic. Had a family emergency, my sister in Vegas. You understand how these things go. I didn't have an aunt in Vegas. I didn't have any aunts anywhere." "We tried calling multiple times," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice shakier than usual. "Rebecca has been extremely distressed. Kids are resilient," Mom said, reaching for my hand. "Aren't you, baby? You had fun here, didn't you? Like a big sleepover?" I didn't answer immediately. Her grip on my hand tightened. Not enough to hurt, but enough to remind me that I was supposed to agree with her version of reality. "It wasn't a sleepover," I said quietly. "I was scared." "Rebecca," her voice carried a warning I recognized. "Don't be dramatic." In her purse, the same black leather bag she'd carried for years, was a casino receipt from the Flamingo Hotel, dated Tuesday night, the same day she'd dropped me off. The timestamp showed she'd been gambling at 11:47 p.m. while I was crying myself to sleep on a daycare cot. I wouldn't discover that receipt until I was 16 and searching her purse for lunch money. But somehow, even at 4, I knew. The knowledge sat in my stomach like a stone. She had chosen to be somewhere else. "We'll need to file a report," Ms. Rodriguez said. "It constitutes neglect under state guidelines." A report. Mom's voice rose, and for the first time her composure cracked. "For leaving my daughter with qualified child care providers? That's ridiculous." But she was already calculating, already shifting into the mode I would come to know so well. Performance of wounded innocence that made everyone else question their own perceptions. Come on, Rebecca. Let's go home. She reached for my backpack and I let her take my hand. Because at 4 years old, even a mother who disappears is still the only mother you have. As we walked to the car, I turned back once to wave at Mrs. Patterson, whose face was a mask of professional composure barely containing heartbreak. I never saw her again. Elementary school became my refuge, though I didn't understand why until much later. While other children complained about homework and early bedtimes, I threw myself into academics with the desperation of someone trying. To earn their place in the world, Mrs. Goldman, my third-grade teacher, was the first to notice the pattern. Her counselor's notes, which I would request as an adult researching my own childhood, painted a picture of a child who never quite relaxed. Rebecca demonstrates exceptional academic performance, but exhibits hypervigilance in social situations. Asks repeatedly about pickup procedures. Shows anxiety when parents are late for school events. What Mrs. Goldman couldn't have known was that I had developed an internal countdown system. Every day, I watched the clock, calculating exactly when Mom was supposed to arrive. 3:15 dismissal meant she should be in the pickup line by 3:10. When 3:20 came and went, my chest would tighten. By 3:30, I was fighting tears. The few times she forgot entirely, lost in phone calls or errands, or whatever captured her attention, that Di learned to wait with the school secretary until someone remembered I existed. But I also learned to excel. Every A+ was insurance against abandonment. Every gold star a small proof of worthiness. If I was the best student, the most helpful child, the least trouble possible, maybe she wouldn't have reasons to leave again. Rebecca is such a mature child, adults would say approvingly. So responsible for her age. They meant it as a compliment, not recognizing that maturity in an 8-year-old is often trauma disguised as virtue. While my classmates worried about playground politics, I was managing household schedules. Mom forgot, reminding her about parent-teacher conferences, and learning to forge her signature on permission slips when she was too distracted to sign. Then the pattern of her unreliability became my normal. Birthday parties she'd promised to attend, but forget. School plays where I'd scan the audience hopefully until the curtain fell. Mother's Day breakfast where I'd savor a seat that remained empty while other families laughed together over orange juice and pastries. Your mom seems really busy, my friend Jessica said after the 5th time Mom failed to show up for a play date. She has important work, I would lie, because admitting the truth that she simply forgot or chose something else felt like betraying myself as much as her. By 4th grade, I'd stopped inviting friends over entirely. Our house was unpredictable, sometimes clean and welcoming. Other times chaotic with unwashed dishes and unopened mail scattered across every surface. I never knew which version they'd encounter, and the uncertainty was more exhausting than isolation. Instead, I cultivated relationships with teachers and school staff who became my emotional anchors. Mrs. Chen, the librarian, let me stay after school to help organize books. Mr. Williams, the janitor, taught me to play chess during town fair. I cultivated chess during lunch recess. These adults provided the consistency and attention I craved, though I was careful never to explicitly ask for it. Rebecca has formed unusually strong attachments to authority figures, noted Dr. Stevens, the school psychologist, after I was referred for academic testing. Recommend evaluation for perfectionist tendencies and possible abandonment issues. Mom never followed up on the recommendation. At home, I became a small parent to myself, setting my own bedtime, packing my own lunches, and developing systems to manage the unpredictability of life with someone whose attention span for parenting lasted about as long as her attention span for everything else. The survival skills I developed, hyper-awareness, people-pleasing, emotional, self-sufficiency, would serve me well later in life. But they also taught me that love was something you earned through performance, not something freely given. By 5th grade, I already knew I wanted to work with children. I just didn't understand yet that I was trying to save the child I used to be. High school graduation should have been a celebration. Fall scholarship to the state university. Early acceptance into the psychology program. Every metric of success pointed toward a bright future that I'd built entirely on my own. The auditorium was packed with families clutching flowers and cameras, their faces glowing with pride for their accomplished children. I sat in the front row with the other honor students, my cap perfectly positioned, my speech folded neatly in my hands, and I scanned the crowd with diminishing hope for a familiar face. Mom had promised to be there. Wouldn't miss it for the world, baby, she'd said 3 days earlier, sounding genuinely excited. My daughter, the valedictorian. I'm so proud of you. But promise and performance had never aligned in her world. When Principal Morrison called my name to deliver the valedictorian address, I walked to the podium alone. My speech about perseverance and chasing dreams felt hollow as I spoke to an audience that included everyone's family except mine. In the sea of faces, I spotted Mrs. Chen from the school library, who'd taken vacation time to attend. Her presence meant more than she could have known. After the ceremony, while my classmates posed for pictures with proud parents and grandparents, I collected my diploma and scholarship certificates quietly. Mrs. Chen approached with a small bouquet she'd brought from her own garden. "Your mother missing this doesn't diminish what you've accomplished," she said gently. "You did this yourself." That night, I found Mom at the kitchen table with a bottle of wine and a man I'd never met before. She looked up as I entered, and for a moment, her face was blank, as if she couldn't quite place why I was wearing a cap and gown. "Oh, graduation was today," she said, her words slightly slurred. "How did it go, honey? How did it go?" The question sat between us like a chasm. How do you explain to someone that their absence from the most important day of your young life had taught you more about your relationship than their presence ever could have? "It was fine," I said, because the truth would have required an emotional investment from her that I'd stopped expecting years earlier. But the graduation photo tells the real story. I keep it in my office now, not displayed, but filed away where I can reference it when I need to remember why I do the work I do. In it, I'm standing alone in my cap and gown, holding my diploma and scholarship certificates, smiling for a camera held by a school photographer who'd taken pity on the valedictorian with no family present. The isolation of that moment crystallized something I'd been learning gradually. I could succeed without her approval, without her presence, without her at all. The realization was both devastating and liberating. College became my escape route. The scholarship covered everything: tuition, room, board, books, creating a financial independence that meant I never had to ask her for anything again. Moving into my dorm room felt like stepping into a new life where my worth wasn't measured by someone else's capacity to remember I existed, but freedom came with its own challenges. My freshman year roommate, Sarah, was everything I wasn't: spontaneous, trusting, comfortable with the messiness of human connection. She invited me to parties I politely declined, suggested study groups I preferred to avoid, and offered friendship I was too afraid to fully accept. "You don't have to do everything alone," she said one evening, finding me in the library at midnight, working on an assignment that wasn't due for another week. "I prefer it that way," I replied, which was both true and heartbreaking. Psychology courses became my lens for understanding not just human behavior in general, but my own patterns specifically. Learning about attachment theory felt like discovering a map to territory I'd been navigating blindly for years. Abandonment, hypervigilance, emotional self-sufficiency. Suddenly, there were clinical terms for the survival strategies I developed. I was healing myself one textbook at a time, preparing for a career built around preventing other children from learning what I'd learned too young: that the people who are supposed to protect you sometimes just disappear. Graduate school was where I first encountered Dr. Sarah Chonot, related to the librarian who'd shown me kindness, but a woman who would become the mother figure I'd never had. She was the department chair of clinical psychology, a specialist in childhood trauma who saw through my perfectly constructed academic facade within the first week of classes. "Rebecca," she said after my presentation on attachment disorders, "could you stay after class? I'd like to discuss your research interests." I'd chosen the topic because it felt safely academic, a clinical exploration of something that happened to other people. Dr. Chen saw through that immediately. You write about abandonment trauma with unusual insight, she observed, settling into the chair across from her desk. Personal experience often informs our professional calling. The kindness in her voice almost undid me. I'd spent so many years building walls around my story that someone gently suggesting they could see over them felt both terrifying and relieving. I'm interested in the research, I said carefully. Of course you are. And you should be, you have. Intuitive understanding that can't be taught from textbooks. She leaned forward slightly. But Rebecca, you can't heal others from wounds you haven't acknowledged in yourself. That conversation led to my first real therapy experience. Not the school counseling I'd deflected in childhood, but genuine therapeutic work with Dr. Martinez, a woman whose name I would later choose to honor professionally. Sitting in her office twice a week, I learned to excavate the careful layers of self-protection I'd built around the 4-year-old hood weighted by that window. Tell me about your mother, Dr. Martinez said during our third session. Such a simple question, but it took months to answer honestly. I started with the clinical details: abandonment, inconsistent caregiving, emotional neglect. But eventually, I had to face the raw truth. I was angry, furious, grieving not just what she'd done, but what she'd never been capable of giving. I made myself successful to prove I didn't need her. I admitted 6 months into therapy. But I'm exhausted from carrying that proof. What would it feel like to succeed for yourself instead of despite her? The question revolutionized my entire approach to achievement. Slowly, carefully, I began to separate my drive for excellence from my need to prove worthiness. My doctoral research on childhood abandonment became less about academic advancement and more about understanding the mechanisms of healing. Dr. Chen became my dissertation advisor and, more importantly, my first model of what reliable maternal support could look like. She remembered my birthdays, checked on me during stressful exam periods, and celebrated my successes with genuine pride that had nothing to do with her own reflection. You know, she said during my dissertation defense preparation, you remind me of myself at your age. Brilliant, driven, and absolutely determined to fix the world for children because someone failed to fix it for you. Is that a bad thing? It's a powerful thing, but make sure you're also fixing it for the child you were. My doctoral diploma hangs in my office now not because it represents academic achievement, but because it symbolizes the moment I transformed my childhood trauma into professional purpose. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, PhD in clinical psychology, specializing in childhood trauma and family systems. The little girl who'd been abandoned had grown up to become the protector she'd needed. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd chosen my professional name to honor my therapist, creating a symbolic family tie that felt more meaningful than the biological one that had failed me. In building my practice, I was constructing the safety net I'd never had for myself and for the children who would sit in my office years later. Opening my private practice felt like coming full circle. The office I designed was everything little. Angel's Daycare had been bright, warm, safe, but with one crucial difference. Here, children knew exactly when their parents would return. I scheduled sessions with precision, confirmed appointments religiously, and never, ever left a child wondering if someone would come for them. My first client was a 6-year-old named Emma, whose mother had developed a gambling addiction. Sitting across from her in my office, watching her scan the waiting room for a parent who was late again, I saw myself with perfect clarity. Emma, I said gently, would you like to draw me a picture while we wait for your mom? She nodded, reaching for the crayons with small, hopeful hands. As she drew 2 stick figures holding hands under a sunny sky, made a silent promise to both of us. This time, someone would keep watch. Someone would make sure she wasn't forgotten. By 38, I had built exactly the life I'd envisioned during those lonely nights in graduate school. My practice occupied a beautiful corner suite in the medical district, with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light and a waiting room, designed to feel more like a living room than a clinical facility. The psychology today feature article framed on my wall, more for the validation it's represented than for marketing purposes, captured the professional milestone perfectly. Local therapist transforms lives through trauma-informed care. The accompanying photo Showed me in my office, surrounded by the diplomas and certifications that proved I'd made something meaningful from my pain. Dr. Martinez has helped our family understand patterns we didn't even know existed. One quoted parent explained, She sees things other therapists miss because she's lived it herself. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. I could identify manipulation tactics in a 5-minute conversation, spot emotional neglect from across a waiting room, and guide families through healing processes with precision born from necessity. My own mother remained a puzzle I'd chosen. To stop trying to solve my client roster read like a catalog of childhood wounds I recognized intimately: Sarah, age 7, whose father promised weekend visits that never materialized. Marcus, age 9, whose mother's addiction meant he never knew which version of her would pick him up from school. The Chen twins, ages 5 and 6, whose parents' bitter divorce had turned them into emotional messengers between hostile adults. Each success story in my practice felt like retroactive healing for the child I'd been. When Sarah learned to express her disappointment about her father's broken promises instead of blaming herself, when Marcus developed coping strategies for his mother's unpredictability, when the Chen twins realized their parents' problems weren't their fault, these victories mattered more than any professional accolade. But success came with its own form of isolation. My carefully constructed life was precisely that: constructed. I lived in a beautiful townhouse I'd bought with cash, drove a reliable car I'd researched extensively before purchasing, and maintained friendships that were warm but not deep. Everything in my world was controlled, predictable, safe. Dating had proven particularly challenging. Men found my independence attractive initially, but the walls I'd built around emotional vulnerability eventually frustrated them. "You're like a beautiful fortress," one ex-boyfriend had said during our breakup conversation. Impressive from the outside, but impossible to actually enter. He wasn't wrong. I'd learned early that depending on someone meant risking abandonment. So I'd simply eliminated dependency from my emotional vocabulary. I was successful, respected, financially secure, and profoundly lonely in ways I'd become expert at not examining. Too closely, my evenings were spent reading professional journals, preparing for the next day's sessions, and maintaining the elaborate self-care routines that kept my emotional equilibrium balanced. Yoga classes where I smiled politely at other participants but never lingered for coffee afterward. Book clubs where I contributed thoughtful insights but declined invitations to members. Dinner parties. The emptiness wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, professional, well-managed. Like everything else in my life, I'd turned loneliness into something I could control and schedule around until the phone rang that Tuesday afternoon, displaying a number I recognized but had been avoiding. Sunset Manor Nursing Home. My mother's voice on the voicemail, smaller and more fragile than I remembered, asking for help in a way that sounded genuinely desperate. For the first time in my memory, sitting in my perfectly organized office, surrounded by evidence of the life I'd built without her. I had to decide, was success enough to fill the space where forgiveness might have lived? The medical records arrived by fax the next morning. 23 pages of clinical documentation that told the story of my mother's rapid decline. Diabetes complications, early-stage dementia, blood pressure, irregularities that required constant monitoring. The woman who had once disappeared for days at a time now needed help remembering to take medication twice daily. Linda Chen's voice had been carefully professional when she called back, but I caught the underlying relief when I agreed to review the documentation. "Dr. Martinez, I have to be honest, your mother has been quite difficult about accepting help. She keeps insisting her daughter will handle everything, but until now, we hadn't been able to reach you." Of course, she'd been difficult. Taking care of herself had never been her strength, and accepting help required admitting vulnerability, something that had always been easier for her to demand from others than display herself. The records painted a picture of someone desperately trying to maintain independence while her body and mind betrayed her. Missed appointments because she forgot to write them down. Medication errors that landed her in the emergency room twice in the past month. A fall in her apartment that she'd hidden from the nursing staff until an aide discovered the bruising. "She speaks about you often," Linda continued. "She's very proud of your accomplishments. Says you're a doctor who helps children. The words hit differently than they should have. Proud. After 34 years of minimal contact, sporadic birthday, cards, and conversations that felt more like obligatory status updates than genuine connection. She was proud. But the medical records also revealed something else. I was listed as her emergency contact, power of attorney, and next of kin. Decisions about her care, her living situation, her very survival all fell to me. The woman who had taught me what abandonment felt, like had made me responsible for ensuring she wouldn't experience it herself. The irony was almost poetic. The 4-year-old who had waited by that daycare window now held complete control over whether anyone would come when she called for help. What kind of decisions are we talking about? I asked Linda, though I suspected I already knew. Well, she can't continue living independently. Her current apartment isn't suitable for someone with her mobility issues, and she needs supervision for medication management. We're looking at assisted living facilities, or potentially memory care if her cognitive decline continues. Memory care. The woman who had forgotten to pick me up from daycare was losing her memory entirely. There was something almost symmetrical about it, a cosmic justice that felt both satisfying and hollow. How long do I have to decide? Ideally, within the next few days. Her current situation isn't sustainable. And honestly, Dr. Martinez, I think she's scared. She's been asking for you more frequently. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring at the medical records spread across my desk. Somewhere in those clinical notes was the mother who had shaped every therapeutic technique I'd learned, every boundary I'd built, every wall I'd constructed around my heart. The little girl in me wanted to tell Linda Chen that Patricia Martinez had made her choice 34 years ago. But the woman I'd become knew that some choices create consequences no one anticipates, including the choice to hold someone else's fate in your hands. The visitor log at Sunset Manor told its own story, page after page of names, family members, visiting grandparents, children checking on parents, spouses maintaining decades-long partnerships. Then, in the section marked Patricia Martinez, room 247, a long stretch of empty lines until yesterday, when I'd signed my name for the first time in what the records indicated was 8 months. Dr. Martinez. Linda Chen's face brightened with genuine relief as she met me in the lobby. Thank you so much for coming. Your mother will be thrilled. Thrilled! I wondered if she remembered being thrilled to see me at any point during my childhood, or if this emotion was reserved for moments when she needed something. The walk down the corridor felt endless. Sunset Manor was nicer than I'd expected, more like a hotel than the institutional facility I'd imagined. Soft lighting, artwork on the walls, the distant sound of a piano from the activity room. It was the kind of place where people came to age gracefully, supported by family and professional care. Room 247 was at the end of the hall, doors slightly ajar. I could hear the television inside a daytime talk show playing to an audience of one. Linda knocked gently before pushing the door open wider. Patricia, your daughter is here to see you. The woman in the hospital bed was not the mother I remembered. 72 years had diminished her in ways that shocked me, even though I'd prepared myself for decline. Her hair, once carefully styled and colored, was gray and thin. Her face, which I remembered as animated and often distracted, seemed smaller. Somehow. More fragile. But her eyes still held the same quick intelligence that had always made her seem like she was calculating something just out of my reach. Rebecca. Her voice was smaller than I remembered, uncertain in a way that was completely foreign to the confident woman who had breezed into that daycare 34 years ago. Is it really you? I stepped into the room, noting the institutional smell masked by air freshener, the medical equipment positioned discreetly but visibly around her bed, the single photo on her bedside table, my high school graduation picture, the one where I stood alone. Hello, Mom. She struggled to sit up straighter, and I found myself moving to help her before I could think better of it. Her hand, when it briefly touched mine, felt paper-thin and surprisingly cold. Oh, honey, you look so beautiful, so successful. Her eyes filled with tears that seemed genuine, though I'd learned long ago that her emotions could be as performative as everything else about her. I've missed you so much. The words hung between us, loaded with 34 years of complicated history. Had she missed me? Or had she missed the idea of having a daughter when it became convenient to need one? Linda tells me you've been having some health issues, I said, choosing the neutral ground of medical facts over emotional territory I wasn't ready to navigate. Oh, you know how it is. Getting old isn't for sissies. She attempted her old bright smile, but it faltered quickly. The doctors here are very nice, but they don't really listen, not like they would to another doctor. There it was the assumption that I would step in, take charge, be the daughter she needed now, even though she'd never been the mother I'd needed then. What exactly do you need from me? I asked directly, falling back on the clinical approach that had served me well in difficult conversations. The question seemed to surprise her. You're my daughter, my only family. Only family? As if the isolation of her current situation was something that had happened to her, rather than something she'd created through decades of choosing her own convenience over meaningful relationships. The staff here says you need help making decisions about your care going forward. I do. Her voice became smaller, more vulnerable. Rebecca, I know we haven't time. No, I wasn't. She stopped, seeming to search for words that had never come. Isley, to her, I need you. It's the words I'd longed to hear at 4 years old, at 8, at 16, at 22. Now, at 38, they felt both too late and exactly on time. She needed me now, when she was vulnerable and scared and facing the kind of abandonment she'd once inflicted without apparent thought. I looked around the room at the medical charts, the emergency call button, the window that looked out onto a parking lot where no one was coming to visit except me. I need to understand your medical situation better, I said finally. And we need to talk about what kind of care you're willing to accept. What I didn't say was that we also needed to talk about what kind of care she'd earned. My mother's apartment, the one she'd have to leave soon, held 34 years of choices, preserved in photograph albums and memory boxes. Linda Chen had given me the key so I could gather important documents and personal items for her transition to assisted living. What I found instead was an archaeological dig through the life she'd chosen over me. The photo album sat on her coffee table like evidence waiting to be discovered. Its pages told the story of a woman who'd lived fully and selfishly, documenting every phase of her adult life with careful attention to her own happiness. Page after page of pictures with men I'd never met, birthday dinners, weekend trips, casino nights, holiday celebrations that had happened while I was spending those same holidays alone or with whatever teacher or neighbor had taken pity on me. There was Frank from the early 80s, distinguished and silver-haired, captured in photos from what looked like expensive restaurants and beach vacations. Then Miguel from the late 80s and early 90s, younger and flashier, posing beside sports cars and motorcycles. The chronology continued through the decades, a parade of companions who'd shared her bed, her travels, her attention during the years. When I was learning to pack my own lunches and sign my own permission slips, what struck me most wasn't their presence, but my absence. In hundreds of photos spanning my entire childhood and adolescence, I appeared in perhaps a dozen school pictures she'd been obligated to buy. A few Christmas mornings where my presence was unavoidable. My high school graduation, the same photo. That now sat by her nursing home bed, though in the album it was tucked between pictures of a weekend in Atlantic City with someone named Rebecca. The casino loyalty cards filled an entire drawer, gold and platinum levels from establishments across 3 states. The dates on the accumulated points told their own story. Points earned during my birthday weekends. My graduation days. This summer I'd been hospitalized with pneumonia and had waited 3 days for her to visit. In a shoebox marked important papers, I found the documentation of her priorities. Receipts from luxury purchases made while I wore secondhand clothes. Credit card statements showing expensive dinners charged on nights when I'd made myself peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. Vacation itineraries for trips taken during my school breaks, when normal parents were spending time with their children. But it was the letters that cut deepest. A stack of correspondence from my teachers, my guidance counselors, my pediatrician, all requesting parent conferences, expressing concerns about my emotional well-being, asking for her involvement in my life. Some had been opened and ignored. Others remain sealed, their urgent messages about her daughter's needs apparently deemed unworthy of her time. Dear Mrs. Martinez, one letter from my fourth-grade teacher began. Rebecca seems to be struggling with some behavioral changes. She's become very withdrawn and seems anxious about pickup times. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss how we can best support her. The letter was dated 3 months after Mom had started dating Miguel, based on the photo albums that had been a particularly busy period of weekend trips and romantic adventures. Another letter from my high school guidance counselor, Rebecca, has indicated she'd like to pursue early college admission. Given her exceptional academic performance and mature disposition, I believe this could be beneficial. However, this decision requires parental input and financial planning discussions. She'd never mentioned receiving that letter. I'd assumed early admission wasn't an option because she'd never brought it up. I'd spent an extra year in high school, surrounded by younger classmates. Because the woman responsible for advocating for my future had been too distracted to read mail from my school. In the very back of the album, tucked behind the last pages, like an afterthought, I found a section labeled Rebecca. 5 pages compared to the 40 dedicated to her romantic adventures. Pictures of me as a toddler, before I'd become inconvenient. A few school photos. My college acceptance letter, apparently worth preserving even if it hadn't been worth discussing. The final item was a drawing I'd made at age 6, recovered from some forgotten box. A stick figure family with the words, "I love you, Mommy," written in crayon across the top. Below it, in her handwriting, a note. Rebecca drew this for Mother's Day. So sweet. Sweet enough to keep. Not sweet enough to change for. I returned to Sunset Manor the next day with a letter I'd written using every therapeutic technique I'd learned about healthy boundary setting and honest communication. If she wanted my help, she was going to hear. The truth first. The letter was typed on my professional letterhead, clinical and clear on intervention disguised as a family conversation. I'd struggled with the tone, wanting to be direct without being cruel, honest without being vindictive. The therapist in me understood that healing required truth-telling, even when that truth was uncomfortable for everyone involved. "Mom, I," said, settling into the chair beside her bed, "before we discuss your care needs, I need you to understand something about our relationship." She looked up from the daytime talk show she'd been watching, her face brightening with the kind of hopeful attention I'd craved as a child. "Of course, honey. We have so much to catch up on." "No, we don't." I kept my voice gentle but firm. "We have 34 years of reality to acknowledge." Her smile faltered slightly. "Rebecca, I know I wasn't perfect. You left me at daycare for 3 days when I was 4 years old." The words came out calmly, professionally, but they landed in the room like stones thrown into still water. "You went to Las Vegas with a man I'd never met while I slept on a cot, believing you'd come back." "Oh, honey, that was so long ago." "We're fine. You were safe." The dismissal was so automatic, so reflexive, that I almost admired its efficiency. Even now, faced with the consequences of her choices, she couldn't acknowledge the impact of her actions. I wasn't fine. I pulled out the letter, unfolding it carefully. "I'm going to read you something I wrote, and I need you to listen without interrupting." Her face tightened with the kind of defensive expression I remembered from childhood. The look that preceded lectures about my ingratitude or dramatic tendencies. "Patricia," I began reading from the letter, "you are asking me to step into a caregiving role that requires trust, reliability, and emotional investment. Before I can consider this, you need to understand what your parenting taught me about these concepts, Rebecca. This is unnecessary. Your abandonment, when I was 4 years old, taught me that promises from you were meaningless. Your absence from my school events taught me that your priorities would never include me. Your failure to respond to my teachers' concerns taught me that my emotional well-being was not worth your attention. Stop this." Her voice carried an edge now, the familiar authority she'd used to shut down uncomfortable conversations throughout my childhood. "You're being cruel. I learned to excel academically because achievement was the only way to earn adult attention. I learned to be self-sufficient because depending on you led to disappointment. I learned to suppress my emotional needs because expressing them inconvenienced you." A nurse passing in the hallway slowed, clearly hearing the raised voices from inside the room. I lowered my volume but continued reading. You taught me that. Love was conditional inconvenience, that family bonds could be severed without consequence, and that a child's needs were secondary to an adult's desires. These lessons shaped every relationship I've ever had. You turned out fine. She snapped, her mask of vulnerability slipping completely. Look at you, you're successful. You're a doctor. You have a beautiful life. So I wasn't the perfect mother. So what? So what? I folded the letter carefully and looked at her directly. So I'm considering whether to provide you with the care and reliability you never provided me. The silence that followed was profound. She stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time, recognizing perhaps that the compliant child she remembered had grown into an adult with power and choices. You can't be serious. I'm your mother. You're the woman who gave birth to me, I corrected. Whether you've been a mother is exactly what we're discussing. Her eyes filled with tears, whether from genuine emotion or strategic manipulation. I couldn't tell anymore. Rebecca, please. I know I made mistakes, but I'm sick. I'm scared. I need you. I know you do. I stood, smoothing my skirt with the same professional composure I used in difficult therapy sessions. But needing something and deserving it are different concepts. I learned that from you too. The letter remained on her bedside table when I left, along with my business card and a promise to call within 48 hours with my decision. The power of attorney documents sat on my desk like a loaded weapon. 23 pages of legal authority that gave me complete control over Patricia Martinez's medical decisions, financial affairs, and living arrangements. She'd signed them. Years ago, during a moment of practical thinking, probably never imagining they'd be activated under these circumstances with a single signature. I could determine the quality of care she received, the facility where she'd spend her remaining years, even whether she'd have visitors or live in isolation. The 4-year-olds who had waited helplessly by that daycare window now held absolute power over the woman who'd taught her what abandonment felt like. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. Linda Chen had called twice in the past day. Checking. On my decision timeline, Dr. Martinez, I don't want to pressure you, but your mother's current situation really isn't sustainable. She had another fall yesterday, and she's been asking for you constantly. Asking for me. The woman who'd forgotten school plays and missed birthday parties was now desperate for my presence. I wondered if she understood the parallel lift somewhere in her declining mind. She recognized that she was now the one waiting and hoping for someone to remember she existed. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Chun, Dr. Sarah, as I still called her after. All these years had listened to my summary of the esque situation with the careful neutrality that marked our ongoing professional relationship. Even in retirement, she occasionally agreed to sessions when I needed to process particularly complex situations. What does your gut tell you about the right choice? She'd ask during our emergency session. That's the problem. I have too many. Guts talking. I'd laughed, but it felt hollow. The therapist in me says healing requires forgiveness. The daughter in me says consequences matter. The little girl in me wants to make her feel what I felt. And the adult woman you've become. Was the question I'd been avoiding? The adult woman I'd become was successful, independent, and emotionally healthy despite her childhood trauma. I'd built a life that proved her abandonment hadn't destroyed me, but had it made me strong enough to be the person she needed now? Or had it made me too strong to care about someone who'd never cared about me? I pulled out the photo from my desk drawer, the 4-year-old at daycare, grinning with gap-toothed trust. That child had believed in promises, in the fundamental reliability of the adults responsible for her safety. She'd learned through 3 days of terror that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But I'd also learned, through years of therapy and professional training, that becoming like the people who hurt us isn't healing its replication of trauma. The decision crystallized. With sudden clarity, I would help her. Not because she deserved it, not because she'd earned it, not because forgiveness required it. I would help her because the child I'd been deserved to grow into an adult who could choose kindness over vindication. Even when kindness wasn't earned, but help would come with boundaries that protected both of us. I picked up my phone and dialed Linda Chen's number. Linda, this is Dr. Martinez. I've made my decision about my mother's care." "Oh, wonderful." She be so relieved. "I'll oversee her transition to an appropriate assisted living facility and ensure she receives quality medical care," I said, my voice taking on the professional tone I use for difficult conversations. "However, my involvement will be administrative only. I won't be visiting regularly, and I won't be providing emotional support." A pause, I see. "May I ask why?" "Because ensuring someone's safety and providing them with love are different responsibilities. I'm willing to accept the first. The second was forfeited 34 years ago. I'll let her know you'll be handling her care arrangements." "Yes, and Linda. Please don't tell her about the visiting restrictions yet. Let her focus on the relief of knowing someone will take care of the practical matters." I hung up and signed. The power of attorney documents with steady hands. The little girl by the window was finally getting justice, not through abandonment, but through the kind of responsible care her mother had never provided. The letter I left on my mother's bedside table was brief, typed on plain paper rather than my professional letterhead. This wasn't Dr. Martinez writing to a client. This was Rebecca saying goodbye to Patricia. "Mom," it began, "I've arranged for your transfer to Meadowbrook Assisted Living next Thursday. It's a beautiful facility with excellent medical care and a compassionate staff. Your room overlooks the garden, and they have a piano in the common area for afternoon music. You'll be safe and well cared for." I'd toured 3 facilities before selecting Meadowbrook, using the same thorough research approach I applied to every important decision. The staff was well trained, the facility was clean and warm, and the residents seemed genuinely content. She would have everything she needed except the one thing she wanted most: me. "I will handle all administrative matters related to your care, medical appointments, insurance coordination, and facility communications. Your needs will be met and your comfort will be ensured." The practical arrangements had taken 2 days to finalize. Power of attorney activated, medical records transferred, financial accounts organized to cover her care costs. Everything a responsible daughter would do, executed with professional efficiency and emotional distance. However, I will not be visiting. This isn't punishment, it's self-preservation. You taught me early that people leave, that promises break, that love is conditional on convenience. I'm choosing to leave first this time, before you find another reason to disappoint me. When I delivered the letter personally, she was napping in her chair by the window. I watched her for a moment, this woman who'd shaped my entire approach to relationships through her absence, who'd taught me to equate love with fear and trust with foolishness. In sleep, she looked smaller and frailer, but I felt no softening of resolve. "Rebecca." She stirred as I placed the letter on her bedside table. "You came back." "I came to say goodbye." The confusion on her face was immediate and profound. "Goodbye, but I thought you said you'd help with my care." "I will." From a distance, I straightened my purse strap, a gesture of preparation for departure. But she recognized immediately. "You can't just leave me here." Her voice cracked with the same desperation I'd heard in my own voice at 4 years old, begging her not to leave me at daycare. "I can," I said gently. "You taught me how. Rebecca, please. I know I wasn't perfect, but I'm your mother. You can't abandon me." The word hung between us abandon, as if what I was doing bore any resemblance to what she'd done to a 4-year-old child, as if ensuring professional care while protecting my emotional well-being was equivalent to disappearing for 3 days without explanation. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm ensuring you receive better care than you provided me, and I'm setting boundaries you never taught me were possible." I walked to the door, then turned back one final time. She was crying now, whether from genuine remorse, fear of loneliness, or simply the shock of experiencing consequences, I couldn't tell and no longer cared to analyze. "The staff at Meadowbrook will take excellent care of you. They're professionals who understand that meeting someone's needs doesn't require loving them." I closed the door softly behind me and walked down the hall without looking back. At the nurse's station, I left my contact information for emergencies only, signed the final transfer documents, and stepped into the parking lot where my car waited. 4. The first time in 34 years, I was the one leaving first. Dr. Sarah's office hadn't changed in the 15 years since I'd completed my doctoral program under her guidance. The same comfortable chairs, the same soft lighting, the same sense of safety I'd first discovered as a graduate student learning to excavate her own trauma. Now, 3 weeks after walking away from Sunset Manor, I sat across from my former mentor, processing a decision that felt both liberating and complicated. "Tell me about the guilt," she said, settling into her chair with the patience that had made her such an effective therapist and teacher. "It comes in waves. I've been documenting my emotional responses with the same clinical attention I brought to client notes. Intellectually, I know I made the right choice. Emotionally, I feel like I've become the kind of person who abandons people who need them. Are those the same thing, what you did and what she did?" The question hung in the air while I considered it carefully. No, she abandoned a dependent child who had no other options and no understanding of adult motivations. I withdrew support from an adult who has professional care and whose own choices created this situation. And yet you feel guilty. Because I was raised by someone who taught me that my needs were secondary to everyone else's. Even now, protecting my emotional well-being feels selfish. Dr. Sarah made a note. She still took careful notes, a habit I'd adopted in my own practice. "How has this decision affected your work with clients?" That was the surprise I hadn't anticipated. "It's made me more effective. I'm better at helping families understand the difference between guilt and responsibility, between forgiveness and reconciliation. I have language now for concepts I could explain theoretically but not experientially." My session notes from the past 3 weeks reflected the shift. Emma, the 6-year-old whose mother's gambling addiction created constant uncertainty, had made breakthrough progress when I could speak authentically about accepting love without accepting harmful behavior. The Chen twins were finally able to express anger at their parents' divorce without feeling responsible for fixing it. I told Marcus yesterday that protecting himself from his mother's chaos doesn't make him a bad son. I continued. 3 weeks ago, I couldn't have said that with complete conviction. "'Cause you hadn't protected yourself yet." Exactly. I pulled out a thank you card from my bag, the artifact that had crystallized my understanding of the week's events. This came from Emma's father. His daughter drew it after our last session. The card was typical childhood artworks, tick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with "Thank you, Dr. Martinez," written in careful 7-year-old script. But the accompanying note from her father provided the context that mattered. "Emma told me you helped her understand that she can love her mommy and still feel safe. She's sleeping through the night for the first time in months. Children need permission to protect themselves," Dr. Sarah observed, "and they need to see adults who model healthy boundaries." I couldn't teach Emma to value her own emotional safety while I was sacrificing mine to avoid feeling guilty. The irony wasn't lost on me. Become a more effective therapist by choosing not to be a conventional daughter. My professional growth had required personal boundaries I'd never been taught were acceptable. "Have you heard from your mother?" Meadowbrook sends weekly reports. She's adjusting well to the routine, participating in group activities, and her medical management has stabilized. I kept my voice clinical, factual. "She asks about me regularly, but she's forming relationships with staff and other residents." How does that make you feel? Relieved and sad, and proud that I chose a facility where she could thrive even without my presence. The complexity of the emotions surprised me each time I examined them. I wanted her to be okay without me. Turns out she is. Dr. Sarah smiled, the expression of a teacher watching a student master difficult material. "You've learned to distinguish between ensuring someone's welfare and sacrificing your own peace for their comfort." I learned it from a 4-year-old who figured out how to survive when the adults responsible for her care chose other priorities. For the first time in my adult life, I felt proud of that little girl instead of sorry for her. 6 months later, stood in my office reading another thank you card from a young client, this one from 8-year-old David. His father's alcoholism had taught him to walk on eggshells around adult emotions. His drawing showed 2 figures under a house-shaped structure labeled safe space, and his carefully printed message read, "Thank you for teaching me it's okay to protect my heart." The card joined a growing collection on my bulletin board, tangible evidence that my own healing journey had enhanced my ability to guide others through theirs. Each child I helped set boundaries was a small victory for the 4-year-old who'd waited by that daycare window, believing protection would come from someone else. My practice had evolved since walking Away from Sunset Manor, I spoke more directly about family dysfunction, helped parents understand the difference between love and enabling, and guided children toward self-advocacy without guilt. The work felt more authentic now that I'd stopped trying to heal from wounds I pretended didn't exist. Dr. Martinez, my assistant, knocked softly on the office door. Your 3 o'clock appointment is here. Sarah Chuno, relation to my former mentor, was a new client whose story felt achingly familiar. 9 years old, academically gifted, emotionally mature beyond her years, and desperately trying to earn the attention of a mother whose gambling addiction made every promise unreliable. During our first session, she'd asked if it was normal for children to remind their parents about important events. Sometimes adults get distracted by their own problems. I'd told her gently, that doesn't mean you're not important. But what? If they forget about me? The question had hit like a physical blow, carrying me back 34 years to my own desperate need for reassurance that I mattered to the person who was supposed to love me most. Sarah, I'd said, leaning forward, with the authority of someone who'd survived that exact fear, forgetting about you would be their loss, not your fault. And even if they forget, you still matter. You still deserve protection and care and love. Working with Sarah had become a form of parallel healing. Every session where I helped her understand that adult problems weren't her responsibility was a conversation with my younger self. Every tool I gave her for emotional self-protection was a gift I'd wished someone had given me. The monthly reports from Meadowbrook continued to arrive, documenting my mother's adjustment and care. She'd stopped asking about me after the 3rd month, according to the social worker's notes. She'd formed friendships with other residents, participated in art therapy, and seemed content with the structured routine that provided what she'd never been able to create for her self-consistency. I felt no triumph in her acceptance of my absence, only a quiet satisfaction that I'd chosen a solution that honored both her need for care and my need for peace. She was safe, supervised, and surrounded by professional caregivers who didn't need to love her to provide excellent care. The little girl who'd pressed her face against that daycare window, waiting for someone to remember she existed, had grown into a woman who ensured that other children would never wait alone. I'd broken the cycle not through perfect forgiveness, but through imperfect boundaries that protected the vulnerable and held the powerful accountable. Some debts are paid forward rather than backward. Some healing happens through helping others, instead of fixing the past, and sometimes the child you were becomes the protector you needed, one boundary at a time.